I was a victim of domestic abuse, and I am also the mother of an addict. These situations put my life into a tailspin. My first husband was abusive physically, mentally, verbally, and emotionally. When I would want to leave, he would threaten my life. What a perfect opportunity for evil to swoop in and try to keep me in bondage by whispering lies to me, telling me I was worthless, to feel guilt, feel shame, fear, anxiety, and worry. I felt trapped for many years, but eventually with God and my faith, I found the courage to take my children and leave. Eventually, I would meet the man of my dreams who I'm still with today. Although I was happier than ever and the abuse was over, I didn't realize the bondage I was still in. I was still filled with anxiety, with insecurities, low self-esteem, shame, fear, guilt, but I put on a smile and I continued to push through and be strong for my family. About 15 years ago, I realized that my son was abusing drugs. His addiction was out of control, and at one point, he had an infection in his bloodstream that led to sepsis. He spent over 2 months at UW Hospital battling organ failure and fighting for his life. Shortly after he recovered, I felt hopeful for long-term recovery for him. That hope was soon shattered when we learned that my son had been raped several times by someone that was very close to us and that we trusted and we loved. The pain was too much for him to bear, and he relapsed again and again. I spent years preparing myself that eventually I would get that call, that I would lose my son to his demons. I prayed for God to save him, and I asked why my prayers weren't being answered. I know that I wasn't fully trusting in God, because if I had, I wouldn't have been so consumed and preoccupied with fear, worry, and anxiety. I decided that instead of praying for God to keep him alive, I started asking God to allow my son to find his faith again, to find God, and to trust him. I prayed for this for months, and my prayers were answered as my son completely surrendered his life to God. I realized today that God did hear all of my prayers all these years. My son should have died many times, whether car accidents, sepsis, suicide attempts. I'm learning to have a relationship with him and put all of my trust in him. I always felt that when I cried or prayed for specific things, that I was asking for too much or I was dumping on God. So giving it all to God was very hard for me. But today I know that He wants to hear my cries for help. He wants to show me the way. Most important is that God taught me about forgiveness, and I have learned to forgive the person that harmed my son as a child, which I never thought I would be able to do. I thank God for all the prayers answered, all the peace and all the healing that He has given my family. I am victorious with God.